being at Argonne and really being on the very cutting edge of technological innovation, I mean, you're also director of the Institute for Molecular Engineering, so that's super cutting edge. What is the role of, you have kind of this triumvirate of government, academia, industry, all pushing forward on innovation. Where industry might be, I mean, we're not really in the days of AT&T Bell Labs, where you had companies that were willing to throw a lot of money on very basic, early stage innovation that may not come to fruition, may never be economic. Maybe we see that a little bit with Google and some other Silicon Valley companies, you know, but what is the role of government in the early innovation kind of ecosystem? How can it best work together with industry and academia?
Well, Argonne, where I'm Deputy Director for Science, is one of 17 DOE labs. Ours is particularly a science lab. It's managed for the Department of Energy by the University of Chicago, so that's where the triumvirate that you're talking about comes in. But being a science lab does mean that we do focus at Argonne a lot on basic energy sciences. That's the program that supports a big fraction of work. But about a third of Argonne's budget goes into things that are in the Energy and Global Security Directorate. So there's a kind of a progression from defining needs at a national level to doing the basic science that addresses those needs. But then how do you really get stuff out of the lab into the world? And Argonne and a couple of other labs have been doing things. First of all, there's a system of hubs in the United States, one on photovoltaics, one on battery research that's focused on at Argonne. Argonne also does a lot of energy storage research in fuel cells. To that end, we've created something within Argonne called Access, which is a single point of entry for companies or other agencies that want to develop energy storage research, be it batteries or fuel cells, further. And then one step beyond that, we've created a spin-off company called Volta that was created with a CRADA, a Cooperative Research and Development Agreement with Argonne, that can be invested in by outside companies and help to really create an easy channel for promising technologies to get off of the Argonne campus into the world if they look promising to investors.
All right, Jim, back to you. The U.S. has an election coming up on Tuesday. Very different candidates, very different views of the world. Energy security, fuel competition, what do you see can be done by either candidate to advance the cause of reducing the strategic importance of oil, opening the transportation fuel market to energy arbitrage, opening the fuel tank to energy arbitrage?
Well, there's a handful of rulings by the Environmental Protection Agency that have kept things from maturing along these lines, been more of a barrier than I think many of us thought they were going to be when we first started working on this some years ago. So the first and most important appointment in a lot of ways would be to pick an administrator in a new administration of EPA who saw the importance of being able to shift fuels, who saw the importance of competition, who didn't throw up every last small problem with fuels as a barrier that takes forever to overcome. And I think that there is at least a good chance that that would happen with Trump. I don't know about Hillary Clinton, maybe so. But I think there's a good chance that this sort of step can be taken. There are other things to do. And I would love to see, as I suggested in initial remarks, I'd love to see the U.S. government get solidly behind doing away with OPEC so that we don't have either high prices and the consumer getting ripped off or low prices operate in such a way that they destroy the market. There are things one can do to ease out of having a cartel like OPEC over a period of months and let industry accommodate to it. And I think that would be the second thing I would very much like to see. It would require coordination probably between the Justice Department and the EPA and the White House. But a determined president could do this in the United States. The work has largely been done and set out what actually needs to happen. And it could happen, I think, fairly quickly if we had the will to do it and to order some bureaucrats at EPA around a little bit.
Thank you. Patrick, back to you. You know, we look at China, which we heard from BMW is their most important vehicle market. I would bet it's probably the most important vehicle market for most, if not all, auto companies that are operating in the region.
That's right. They have a joint plant that comes on that town, too.
Now, so obviously, where China goes, the world goes. Let's put it this way: where China, and the U.S. go, or where China, U.S. and Brazil go. If we want to look at more than half of the world's vehicles, there goes the world in terms of future vehicle technologies and so forth. In China, a lot of the shift towards liquid fuel choice in the case of methanol
That's right.
came from the provincial governments,
That's correct.
not from the central government.
No, it's coming from a business, too. Business. I hate to say that, but in the beginning, it was a legal way of adulterating gasoline.
Because it was cheaper.
It was cheaper, and it works as well. So they're adulterating gasoline, which is very expensive, with very cheap methanol that they derive from coal.
Right.
And the people laughing to their way to the banks with that. But by and by, they find that it's more efficient that way, by having a mixture of methanol with gasoline.
And better air quality.
And better air quality, and also better running of the engine as well. So right now, it's being put into the proper place.
You mean the central government, the regulatory
Or legalizing it. I hate to use that word because it is not illegal at the very beginning, but it was just done in an underhanded way. But now it's all very popularized.
So just kind of to capture what you said, what you're saying is, in a way, the provinces, both the provincial governments and the industry led the way, and then the regulator at the top started to acknowledge what was going on and regularize everything.
That's correct. And after they have done a bunch of research into it and verifying the beneficial benefits of having a mixture of these two fuels together, and it's also good for the health, good for the roads, and good for the cars.
It's actually very interesting, because I think when most people think, I've been to China many, many times.
Yeah.
But I think when a lot of people think of China, and when I used to think of China early on, I would say, okay, China is very centrally driven, okay? But that's not the case. But it's not in this case. In this case, you had almost a grassroots effort, something that came from the bottom. It wasn't top driven.
Well, that's right. That's only show you that the Chinese government and Chinese people are very expedient people, okay? Regardless of where the initiative come from. If it's good, we use it. No matter it's a black cat or a white cat, catch its mouth, it's a good cat.
That was Deng Xiaoping?
That's correct.
Okay, so, all right, we have China, we have the U.S., and the U.S. over here, represented by the National Labs, and Israel, three very, very different countries, but so much potential to work together on these issues. If you think how the government and industry in these three countries can work together to move fuel competition forward, what is your top recommendation, either on the very early stage part or on the deployment? Who wants to start? Who shall I pick on somebody, Army volunteer system, or is somebody going to start?
Well, there is already a U.S.-China Clean Energy Research Center program. I haven't seen what's come out of it, but that's a very good start, and that could certainly be generalized to other countries. But it does require, a vision from both sides that's shared.
A leadership at the
right.
top level.
That's right. Yeah.
So, President and Secretary of Energy
Yeah,
in the
right.
U.S.
To add to what Mr. Woolsey said, I think it's very important who the next Secretary of Energy is as well, because they've been very influential in some of these things.
Yeah. Jim, you want to show?
Yeah, I think Israel and the U.S. has a very large program together, the Bird Energy Program. It's, I think, $8 million per year, and of companies from both sides that cooperate and do things together. We just signed another agreement with the U.S. That will even further strengthen these ties between the nations, and I think it's a very good thing for Israel and the U.S. We also signed I think a half a year ago with China an agreement that will start evolving together. I hope it will be as successful as the U.S. Agreement. I think Israel, in that case, we're not as big as China and the U.S. A bit. Yeah, we have some time to go until we get there, but in the R&D sector, I think Israel has a lot to give, not only to take from these two nations.
Jim?
I guess I'd just say that a coalition consisting of Israel, the United States, China, and Brazil, which coordinated requirements for the computers in cars in such a way as to make it necessary for it to be available with a slight change in the program for it to use methanol up and other fuels up in increasing degrees year by year. There are just some technical steps like that I think could be taken that would have a huge impact on whether the fuel was actually able to be used and one was not going to get in trouble for using it a year too soon, et cetera. That I think would do a lot, and I think those four countries, if they got together and coordinated and brought about an easy shift between fuels, nobody else is going to stand in the way.
So first 100 days of the new president pushed Congress to pass a law that says new cars sold in the U.S. need to be capable of fuel competition of some sort. True fuel flexibility, vehicle electrification, CNG, something.
Right. If you have gasoline, ethanol, count that as one because those are integrated now. If you have gasoline, ethanol counts as one, and increasing share of the automobiles manufactured, to say up to half very quickly, have to be able to use two fuels. So gasoline, ethanol, and methanol would count. Gasoline, ethanol, and electricity would count. Plug-in hybrids. There would make it possible for people to use what types of alternatives they want and to have a framework, not a dictate that they have to use this kind or have to use that kind. And I think that could be done by those four countries relatively quickly.
And on the liquid fuel choice and on the low cost end, we're talking about a cost of under $100 a vehicle.
Oh yes, absolutely. Way under.
Patrick, I know you want to jump in.
Yeah, I would jump in. There are a lot of rooms that we can all learn from one another and work together as well. And we all know that Brazil is a very big country and is the country that first put forward the biofuel to ethanol. And the majority of its fuel is coming from green sources of hydropower and have very, very small carbon footprint. And whereas China, all that we have is coal. And we have to use that more responsibly and more effectively and cleanly. And what United States have is high technology, especially on clean coal technologies. And so that's something that we can all share.
Oh, and since we're talking about this, the whole shale gas, the whole fracking revolution in the U.S. is something that can hopefully be transferable to China, perhaps.
Yes, it can. It's not only shale gas, but shale oil.
Shale oil, yes.
Yeah.
And then if China has access to low-cost natural gas, we can dream, right? Then that will change a lot of things.
The IEA most recently came out with the data that China is the biggest reserve of natural gas, and yet to be proven. But
it's all a matter of technology.
That's correct. It depends on how you count it.
All right, so we have just a few minutes left. I want to ask you, looking at the last, let's say the year since 2008. 2008, oil price was $147 a barrel. It was really the height of the market. And there was a lot of motivation among constituents, especially political constituents. In Washington, really, their phones are ringing off the hook for Congress to do something about the issue. With today's oil prices, constituents, and I assume in other countries as well, tend to be a lot less interested in the issue of energy security. can you please emphasize why we can't drop the ball, whether prices are low, moderate, high, why the focus has to be kept on this issue and on opening the fuel tank to competition?
I think leadership of governments in that case is not judged in the $147 per barrel. Then it's very simple. There's no other way. The leadership, I think, counts when it's $50 per barrel or 40 or 30, we're already there. And that's the place where you want to see leaders take a stand and say, we know prices are going to go up. It's just a matter of time. It's 50 now. It could be 80 then. I remember the 147, people talking about the 200 as the next phase. And I think the government's role is to carry it forward and to bring the solutions for the oil dependency to a place where, first of all, it could be there when it reaches $100 and even more. It needs to be in a place where in $50 per barrel, it still is economically viable to move or to switch to other fuels. It can happen with CNG, it can happen with electric cars, it can happen with a lot of other technologies. But I think the role of the leadership is to not abandon it when it's hard. Because 147 is it's a very clear message. So I think that's the role.
Plus there's many other reasons, at least a handful of other reasons besides the price of oil to think about alternative fuels. Global security is one of them, urban air quality is another, climate change could be another, and again, leadership has to get those points across.
We have to stick to a position that will work and stay with it until it does. I certainly wouldn't attempt to speak for Israel or China or Brazil in this context, but the Americans on this issue are almost perfect examples of, I hope, of what Winston Churchill once said about us, which is that the Americans always do the right thing, but unfortunately only after they've exhausted all other possibilities. And we get off track when the price of oil goes low and people say, well, thank God that problem is solved and we don't need to worry about this anymore. Yes, you do. You have to stay with it. That's why destroying OPEC is so important. It is the instrumentality of managing a market in response to the needs of a handful of oil states. And we have to stop that. We have to destroy OPEC.
Just as I said in the beginning of this session, and when we look back in the history of the oil price, in the 70s when the oil was very high price, everybody said we need alternative fuels. At that time, the government was really spearheading all the research and putting a lot of subsidies and money into R&D and research and renewable fuels. But then afterwards, the oil price came down and nobody give a dime about it. Until in 2008, when the oil price came up again, then everybody was saying, where are our renewables? Where are alternate fuels? But at that time, when the renewables were kicked in by the business, by the industry themselves. And I'm glad to say that. We have to concentrate on developing renewables and alternative fuels even when the oil price is low or moderate, so that we can put the alternative fuels and renewables in a position that could be commercially viable and competitive. This is our chance. We cannot wait until the next crisis when the oil price is up and then we cry bloody murder. And where are our renewables? This is the time to develop renewables. And it's to endow them with abilities to be commercially competitive, to be markedly viable.
That's what I'm hearing from everybody here. We understand the strategic framework, we understand the security and also the environmental issues, but at the end of the day, there has to be a laser focus on the economics. The economics have to play out, the fuels have to be competitive, and we're seeing that with several of the fuels that and like we said, methanol in China from coal, which is really expensive to do stuff with, is still more economic than gasoline and diesel. And we're certainly seeing that with other technologies, with CNG in the US. So it's all about getting the vehicles to be cheap for all these people that aren't wealthy yet, making sure the fuels are cheap, cheap energy is important for economic growth, and not really the subsidies. Maybe for very early stage, pushing the technology into the market, early adopters, like we in the US, we had plug-in hybrid and electric vehicle tax credits, that kind of thing, to jumpstart the market, but not subsidies for fuel over the long term. Rather, break down obstacles and keep things economic. So thank you very, very much to the panel. Let's have a big hand for the panel. And